Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Nate Wenke Podcast, and my guest today is Steven, and Steven is from my philosophy class, and I kind of trapped him in the hallway the other day and was like, hey, we had such a good conversation in philosophy class. You want to keep it going? And told him about the podcast, and he was like, sure, why not? And that's kind of where we're at, and I was hoping, Steven, you could just kind of like, who are you? How did you get trapped with me in this scenario, and what's going on in your world?
Hi, yeah, totally. Great to be here. Hi, my name's Steven, and I'm a literature major over at the college that we attend. And I really like philosophy, really like literature, pretty much anything to do with like the human condition or anything that makes people think, God, that guy's pretentious. Like I love that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I'm here to talk about. I'm a really big fan of open discussion and just talk about anything. So I'm really excited to be here because I kind of get to like exercise that value of mine. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, I figured when I was talking to you, I'm like, okay, this guy seems like, well, you can kind of, I guess we could start here. You can kind of tell when you start to talk to someone if there's someone that you're actually going to be able to talk to. Yeah. In the sense of like, there's someone that isn't so rigid in what they think that you're not going to make any headway in a discussion. You can kind of almost sense that. You can sense when someone is so grounded and dogmatic in what they think that talking to them is like talking to a wall. You're just not really going to get anywhere. And what I really enjoy doing is having conversations with people that at least potentially disagree with me, because like that's where I'm going to learn the most. Yeah. When you have someone that like you present the best version of your argument, and then you have another person present the best version of their argument, and then you kind of see what happens, because it's kind of a mystery. It's kind of the beauty of conversations. You don't really know where it's going to go, but if you both have the same goal of aiming at the truth, then you know that like you're both going to be honest actors and like try to get somewhere. And one quick more note too is, have you heard of Jordan Peterson by chance?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I'm very familiar with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people have different thoughts on him, and we can talk about that in a second. But one thing I do like about him is that one of his rules in his 12 rules, he's big on rules, if you didn't know.
I do know the book. It's 12 Rules for Life, right?
Yep. And he just came out with a second one called 12 More Rules for Life, because we can never have enough rules. But one of his rules was that you should assume the person you're talking to knows something that you don't. Yeah. And this has aided me very well, partly because it's something that I've struggled with, because I enjoy kind of the, let's say, the verbal tussle, the argument of stuff. It's fun for me. So sometimes I'll kind of get caught up in the fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So like having that as a rule and like that as like a starting point has been super useful to me. And I think it also is similar to at least somewhat what Socrates tried to do. So what do you think about that? What do you think about, we can get into Socrates too, that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, totally. Oh gosh, let me go back. So I totally agree, kind of with trying to, I feel like you can tell when you're talking with someone who is willing to either have their mind changed or show you something interesting and disagree with you well. So I think one of the great failures of like modern like discourse is this underlying feeling that if someone's worth talking to you, it's because they agree with you. And I think it's kind of a shame. I feel like personally a rule I try to have is if I have any ideas or like philosophical ideas that I believe in or I'm formulating, I'll try to agree with people twice, or I'll find two people to agree with me, and if they do, then I stop trying to then I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'll find people just to disagree with me. But like you mentioned you can kind of tell like if someone is like willing to have those good discussions, and I think the fastest way to tell is if someone disagrees with you. Because if someone disagrees with you and they know how to disagree with you, and they know how to say like that's really interesting, here's my perspective. Okay. Then that's something that's someone I really want to talk to.
So it's more not that they disagree, but the way in which they disagree. Would you say that?
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I really like I really like rolling around in the mud too. Like with some of these conversations. That being said, obviously my first priority is just to have like good ones. And I will talk to someone if I feel like they're gonna like disagree with me in like an unhealthy way. And I feel like a lot can be gained from that. But usually that's more of like a social thing. Like I can see like where this person's coming from, or maybe we can like connect on a human level, and less of an intellectual thing, which is like what is your ideas and where are you coming from logically. And so like they can both be very productive. I feel like the goal in these two conversations, someone who's good at disagreeing and someone who's bad at disagreeing, I feel like the goal is different for me in those conversations. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. I wouldn't say like, oh, simply because I don't think I'm gonna have the best intellectual honest conversation, I should just write this person off.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's part of the distinction that you're making, and I would never say that. Also, you do, but that also means that you have to be honest about how that conversation is probably going to go.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to leave enough room for the possibility that, well, they know something that you don't, and even if you don't sense that they're being totally intellectually honest, they're still going to have an interesting perspective that maybe it's one of those times where just listening is like super useful.
Yeah.
So
100%. I kind of that's like you talked about like what your goal is in discussions, and how like you follow that rule. Assume that everyone you talk to has one thing that they know that you don't know. I kind of my rule is a bit similar. You mentioned that discussion should seek to find like a truth. I don't really believe in like an objective truth necessarily. I'm very much like a relativist. But I do believe that people have their own truths that are true for them. And what can really be interesting for discussion for me is not just trying to find out the truth of like one chain of logic, but the truth of someone else's chain of logic and see where they're coming from. If that kind of makes sense. I'm really interested in how people think and the things that they think and why. And even if we're not testing, we're not getting like a heated but friendly discussion where we're like throwing ideas back and forth. If I get to like see how their system works and plays out, like I feel like generally that's a really like beneficial thing that I'm like very lucky to have. I'm sure you'd probably agree.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you. One thing, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk more too, is because I thought that we would have some interesting disagreements. So I think that this truth concept, I think, is probably one where we diverge a little bit.
Yeah.
So if I may, one thing that I like to do is try to. Are you familiar with the term steel man and then straw man?
Yeah.
Yeah, so some people, just for people that are listening that aren't familiar with these terms, to straw man someone's perspective is to intentionally mischaracterize what they're saying so that you can quote unquote win. The opposite of that is to steel man their perspective, to do your best to articulate what they're saying in the best possible manner with the most merit, to really understand what they're saying and recognize that there's worth in what their perspective is saying. So if I could kind of steel man what I think you might perhaps have tried to say there too, is you're cognizant of a couple different things. One of is the fact that we live in a very complicated world, and everyone is going to have a different experience in that world. Even the idea of consciousness itself is incredibly complicated. I mean, consciousness is, we almost know nothing about it. It's a bloody miracle as far as I'm concerned. But given that knowledge, recognizing that everyone is going to have a different experience is very useful, especially in that conversational setting. Where I think we probably diverge a little bit is our conception of truth and whether or not you can actually know absolute truth. Because it's one thing to say that, like, in a hypothetical world, like, if I was God, I would know all things. And then it's another thing to then say, like, I'm capable of that. Like, it's kind of two different things there. Like, there might be an objective truth, but then you could say, like, I'm just never going to fully get there. And I would basically agree with that. But then the question is how far can you get? And then, especially when you're talking to someone that is coming from a completely different perspective than you, how much do you want to give weight to A, the fact that there's a lot of things you don't know, and B, the fact that their life and their psychology and their why and all those things can affect what they perceive as true.
Yeah.
And I know there was a lot there.
Oh, it's
but,
okay.
What I guess this would be the question then is your conception of truth. You used the word. You're probably a little bit more of a relativist. What kind of pushed you in that direction? I'm kind of curious.
Like into relativism.
Yeah, and then describe it, because we could talk moral relativism. We could talk more sciencey, like how powerful is science or not. So like there's multiple different areas you can go down that train.
Yeah, totally. No, it's a great question. I'm trying to think back, like, to what originally made me think like relativism was correct. I don't know. Honestly, I think it would still go back to when I like left the church back in like mid to late high school. I really did, like, I essentially started believing there's probably no God. And if there's no God or no omnipotent being, then that means that if there is an objective truth, we probably just can't access it. At the very least, I don't think we can access an objective truth if it is out there right now. Maybe it's possible if like we could create like an all-knowing machine and like simulate the universe inside of it.
That's what I think about,
right? Yeah. But it kind of just feels like I don't know how I would measure objective truth or what like angle to take it from. I would be open to the idea that an objective truth is out there. Personally, I just think as humans, like we're so constrained. At least at this point in our history. Maybe at some point we'll be like deities, scientifically enriched, like whatever.
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. But at least right now, I don't know if we have that. I don't know if we have that capability just to access an objective truth, even if it's out there. And so I think its pursuit can be. I think you could consider its pursuit noble, and I think we can find a lot of really interesting things out trying to find it. But I'm really not convinced that we'll at least be able to find it within our lifetime.
Okay, real quick for a point of clarification. So you're not dismissing the possibility that there is absolute truth. You're more on the side of you're not convinced that we're capable of accessing it.
Yeah, it's if you had to if I had to take a bet right now, and we did have like God like standing behind like a curtain, like Wizard of Oz style,
just chilling.
If you were to take a bet, I think I would bet that there. Oh gosh, that there is no objective truth. I don't know. It's like really 50-50 for me.
Sure.
But I think the thing I'm much more certain of is that regardless, we just can't access it. So, like a relativism is probably the best bet for us right now. At least as far as like science goes. As far as morality goes, I'm pretty certain that there's no objective truth there.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So, we could do like 2 hours on this.
I know, right? I'm so excited.
Oh no, it's good. So with the discussion of truth, again, I'm glad we made the distinction between moral truth and then like scientific truth. Now, you would acknowledge, we could go here for a second. You would acknowledge that the scientific revolution, in terms of the power of science, in terms of our ability to understand, how the world works, has led to, a level of human prosperity that's completely foreign given the scope of history.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, totally. Scientific revolution, absolutely. Well, it was a revolution. It changed the way we did everything, pretty much. Yeah, totally.
So then, if the outcome of the scientific revolution has been such, let's just say, a dramatic, powerful outcome, and would you say that the fact that we suffer less, just from a pure economic perspective, is that good? Would you say that's a good thing?
Personally, I believe it's good. If you were to put it through my moral system, I'd say, like, yeah, that's a great thing. We should try to do that every time. That being said, I just couldn't say it's objectively good.
Interesting.
Because it could be the case that, like, for some, again, I believe that there's no, like, objective moral truth. So if that's the case, then I can't say that suffering or pleasure are inherently good. They're just things that we like or don't like. And so, like, while I personally think that pleasure is a pretty cool thing, like pretty good in general,
thing, yeah.
I like it. So I'm drinking whiskey right now. I just can't objectively say it. So I would personally say subjectively, scientific revolution was great, and all of like the prosperity we got, it was phenomenal, and I'm so happy for it. Objectively, I couldn't say one way or another, technically.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, you're kind of, I don't know, hedging your bets is one way to put it. You're cognizant of the fact that you're worried about making objective claims, which I understand. I get that concern. So here's another question then. Would you agree with this? We have to live in a society that makes at least some level of objective claims in order for that society to function well. So real quick, let me specify, whether or not those objective claims are true in some fundamental sense.
Yeah.
Maybe we can't know, let's say that. But what we can know is that certain things work better or work worse in a societal level system. Societies with laws, with rules are necessary. This, you could go back to, the social contract. You could even go there. That seems like a reasonable claim that having order instead of just pure chaos seems like a better thing than pure tribalism chaos. So even though you wouldn't necessarily claim that that's an objective truth, it's closer to the truth. Would you go there?
I wouldn't say it's closer to the truth.
Really? Okay.
I'd say it's closer to my truth. You and I would probably both agree. Like, societies with laws are in general pretty good. Like they tend to work better than societies without laws. That being said, if we were to think about if this isn't the question you're asking, correct me. But if we were to think about the perfect society morally, I could probably just as if I was an anarchist or if I was really into chaos theory or I think the dinosaurs should come back and rule over us all. I might say something like the best society or a society that we should shoot for is a society that would self-destruct or a society without laws because morally we don't have the right to put laws on other people. We only have laws or we only have internal codes. That's the only thing we should follow. I don't necessarily believe that, but if someone were to believe that, I feel I would say that's one system that would show that the American society, as great as it is, would be terrible. It's everything that a pure anarchist would hate, pretty much. Does that kind of make sense?
Okay, I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know if I totally followed that.
That's totally fine. I rambled. It's the whiskey. I promise.
Oh, you're good. You're good. It makes it more fun. So are you saying that from that perspective, from that anarchist perspective, they would look at our system and be like, no, I'll pass? Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah, it's
I'm essentially saying that we can't objectively say whether or not a society needs objectivity, or whether society is better or worse than another society. As far as the role that objectivity has in our society, we need laws and we need to make judgment calls. I totally agree with that. We do need laws. We need to make judgment calls. If we didn't do that, society would fall apart in hours. That being said, I think it's okay to have a society that makes these judgment calls without saying that they are objective judgment calls.
Could you real quick?
Yeah.
Could you say it's better that the society makes those objective calls? Could you go there?
Personally, you mean society claims to make objective calls,
or not even claims to make objective calls, just that it's better that we have rules than not?
Oh yeah, 100%. Personally, I believe that personally, but again, relativistically, I don't know if that's technically true. But I think pretty much anyone that's I think pretty much anyone would agree. But whether or not truth isn't defined by how many people agree.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, I'm with you on truth is not defined by how many people agree. I'm with you there. Okay. Yep. I'm getting a sense of what you're spitting here.
Thanks for bearing with me here.
No, it's fun. It's always interesting, and again, at the beginning of the conversations, I always find it interesting to hear other people's perspectives. So, okay, while we're on, I want to come back to moral relativism because
Totally.
this is one that I will admit I have a pretty strong opinion about moral relativism, but so that'll be fun. But
I'm excited.
First I want to go to Descartes because it kind of I don't know. In some ways, it's very similar to what we're talking about here. Is there some kind of objective reality? Is there something that we cannot dispute regardless? And for people that aren't familiar with what Descartes did, I'll just give a quick summary. Basically, Descartes was he had always kind of had this problem in the back of his head. He's always like, all right, well, I'm doing all these things, I believe all these things, I've been living this life, but is there anything in my life, in my experience, that I can't doubt? Like 100%, like an absolute bedrock truth that no matter what, style or flavor of attack I send at it, I can't decimate that. And essentially, if I dare to summarize his findings, he basically said, one way of putting it is, he couldn't dispute the reality of his own consciousness. He couldn't dispute that he was thinking in some sense. And then he went a couple different areas after that, but at least that was his bedrock starting point. So if we're going to go to Descartes, would you say that you agree with that as an objective claim for him and then also for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would say yes, at least for me. Again, like Descartes also had this idea that there's like this great evil deceiver, right? And that it could be that everything is like a simulation that this deceiver has. That's like playing a trick on us. So I couldn't say that like Descartes, Descartes' consciousness was real necessarily, like objectively. I think I could be compelled to say that like my consciousness is real. Because I am sensing and feeling and like thinking about these things. I think like what really like this isn't the spirit of the question, but like the next question might be like, how would you define consciousness? Kind of like you were saying. And like, will we ever define it? Like consciousness is the first thing we ever had and the last thing we'll ever figure out.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So it's kind of like, so it's like, maybe I don't know, but like, I know, like to the extent of knowledge that I can know something like this, I know that I experience. And so it would seem like as much as I can say it's objectively true. So I think I would say that.
Okay.
I use a lot of qualifiers in my statements. It's just because I really tend to be careful about what I say, just because I'm really cautious about like my own like opinions.
Yeah, no, and that's good. It's good to be cautious about what you say and careful, because a lot of people are not, frankly, and we can be fairly flippant in what we say. And of course, you have to make room for the fact that you're going to make mistakes, and of course, but I get
Totally.
I get the goal. Okay, that's interesting. So, to bring it quick to me and my own personal experience with this particular question. So, I went on a similar journey to Descartes.
Okay.
I would argue. I was this. So, when you say that you're more of a moral relativist, and we'll describe that later. I don't want to
totally
put you in a box or anything, but like, I would say that I was very relativistic my senior year in high school, I'd say.
Okay.
And I kind of went on a mission, let's say, to use that in a bit of a humorous context. But it was also a very, very serious endeavor where my belief structures had collapsed to a certain extent, and I was searching for something that I couldn't contradict.
Yeah.
And I came away with essentially two things, more or less. And these are complicated, but I'll put them out here and then we can kind of wrestle with them a little bit. The first one was that I couldn't dispute the reality of pain. So it's a bit dark, but it's true. I couldn't dispute the fact of experiencing pain and then the associated next sequence of thought that immediately goes along with pain, which is it would be better if this didn't exist.
Okay.
And that was kind of a bedrock thing for me. And then where that kind of led was a bit dark, to be entirely honest. But I read about what happened in the Soviet Union during the 20th century and what happened in Mao's China specifically, and through probably 5 to 10 different books, which are not for the faint of heart. To be entirely honest, these were very, very difficult books. But what they did for me is that...
real quick, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I just had to mention,
Oh,
if
you're
my
good.
power goes out, it might be because there's a storm going on where we are right now. I'm so sorry to cut you off.
All good.
I just want to let you
No.
know our lights just flickered, and I was like, okay, I should mention this real quick.
Yeah, no
Sorry,
problem.
keep going.
No, you're good. We can totally edit stuff too as well. But yeah, so what this journey did for me was when I was reading about these things, it convinced me of, well, A, the reality of evil, and then B, it convinced me of the reality of evil being fundamentally wrong. And we can get into, the technicalities of why evil is wrong and all those kind of things, and we could. But the biggest argument for my conclusion was, let's just say, the soul-wrenching reaction I had to reading what I read. And what that did for me is it kind of gave me a moral bedrock. Okay, this is wrong fundamentally. And one of my concerns is that if we don't have some kind of moral bedrock and can say, all right, this fundamentally is wrong, at least that's a starting point, then we run into this problem of pure relativism, this pure subjectivism where any direction that we choose to go in seems equal. There's no real path. There's no one is better. There's no one is wrong. And I couldn't see a way to live like that. Now, real quick, that doesn't take away the possibility that you're not going to know the correct way to live, because I'm all on that train. You're certainly not. But if we don't have any conception of right and wrong, I don't even know how to start. Does that sequence make sense? And I know back one more quick thing is I know I said a lot, and there's a lot of personal stuff in there too. But does that sequence kind of make sense to you? Yeah,
totally. Just to kind of recap for me. So like you entered a very relativistic stage, and like during it you did a lot of you really tried hard to find things that would contradict or that would stop contradicting themselves. And one of the few things that you found was that like certain atrocities, for instance, no matter how hard you tried, they never stopped being atrocities.
Is one way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then and you found that if there can be like that moral bedrock, then maybe we could find like some sort of objective truth. Is that kind of where you would lead into that, or am I wrong in that assumption?
Yes. Or you could even make this claim that in order to live in the world, we're forced to make some kind of, let's put it this way, subjective, objective measurements about right and wrong. And again, that doesn't mean that we're going to fully understand them. I'm not claiming some divine wisdom here.
Yeah.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make is I don't know how you live without at least some kind of subjective, objective version of morality that you can subscribe to. So that's a lot, but where do you think you fit in on that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I'm sorry to give you all these like these answers where I'm saying one thing and then saying another. It's just because like the relativist system is kind of like that. Personally, I think that someone could live like that. And maybe someone could live like that and like live like happily. Personally, I don't know if I could, at least right now. I believe that, at least for me, I feel like I need to have some sort of like moral system or some sort of code of ethics internally that I use. And that's kind of how I measure myself morally, and how I keep myself like improving as a person and feeling good. Because for me, like practicing my virtues and my ethics feels really good for me. And personally, I believe other people should have their own internal systems as well. Ideally, I'd like for them to agree with mine because I think my system is the best because that's why I have it, right? But obviously, I'm constantly seeking to improve it through conversations like this. But I couldn't like again. I couldn't objectively say whether or not it's better to have a moral system. Here's what I can say though. Is I believe that we can use subjective means to take objective measurements. So like in society, for instance, if we all like one day, like humans all gather around a campfire and we said, hey, if we all want to live like together and like have long lives, then we need to have like a code of ethics that we follow, on a day-to-day basis. And I feel like from an evolutionary perspective, that's just something that was probably always going to happen. Like that's just a natural step for us as humans. And everyone else that didn't do that like died off. And so you could say that from that perspective, it is very necessary to have like a moral like system for a society. But I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling. Did that kind of answer the question, or could you refine it for me?
Yeah, sure. No, you're not. You're not rambling. The problem is whenever you talk about these kind of things, you're kind of almost forced to ramble because they're complicated.
They're so big. So
you're good. So, well, you brought up an interesting point about the origins of morality from an evolutionary perspective, which I basically wouldn't agree with. I think it's very likely that we've had some of our moral systems can be explained from an evolutionary perspective. What I'm not convinced of is that that's the full explanation.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I'm not convinced that moral systems are 100% because of pure evolutionary drivers. And I would use something like the idea of the image of God and the idea that idea sits at the bedrock of Western culture.
Yeah.
The idea that you, regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of if you were born a serf, you have rights. You have something within you that is almost a divine spark. And that idea, whether you believe in Christianity or God, is in some senses irrelevant to this. That idea sits at the bedrock of Western culture.
Yeah.
And I'm not convinced that an idea like that would have been generated purely from evolutionary biology. Does that make sense as an example? But I still recognize the importance of evolutionary biology. I can maybe refine the question more, but what do you think about that real quick, I suppose?
No, I think that's a totally cool point. I like what you mentioned about like you definitely don't. I don't get the impression either that you would like reject like evolution, like wholesale. And I totally understand kind of wanting to look like outside of ourselves for a morality. Would you say that morality then comes from like a divine realm, or would you say that there is something within ourselves that evolution cannot explain that led us to morality, or at least the morality that we have now? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. So let me put it this way. Kind of back to this point of action and how we think and how we live in the world.
Totally.
In my opinion, we are forced to follow some form of moral ethic. We have to posit goals, or we can't act in the world. So where that moral ethic comes from is almost a different question. So in order to act, we have to make hierarchical judgments about things that are worse or better. But then the second question is, okay, well, there's a couple questions. One, are those hierarchical judgments true in an absolute sense? And then also, where do they come from? And you're more interested in kind of where they come from, at least in this question, perhaps. Is that kind of true?
Yeah, I was just trying to. I was just wondering where your system came from in particular, or if you felt like we have some innate. Because I think we talked about this in class a little. If we have innate sense of free will within ourselves, and that kind of is how we can arrive at moral conclusions without just evolution, or if we have been given some sense of morality through like commandments, for instance, and like that intervened with like our natural Darwinian progression.
Yeah, I hear you. So the honest answer is I don't know. I don't have a strong perspective.
Okay, yeah, I respect it.
I kind of go to this is kind of my fallback position.
Nice.
Is whether or not there is an objective truth out there, whether or not there's even a God out there, whether or not there's an objective morality, I have to act as if there is in order to live.
Okay.
So that's kind of where my argument comes from. It's kind of a pragmatic argument, kind of like I do this because it's useful, but I don't want to denigrate it to purely pragmatism. But it's along those lines because I tend to think about how people act is what they truly believe, not what they say.
Yeah.
So I care more about the fact that, you, I assume at least, don't think it's appropriate to stab me the next time we have class.
I don't.
I would.
Just don't cheat off me, okay?
I got it. No, I appreciate it. But that in and of itself, even if you would say, all right, yeah, I guess I don't really believe in a, absolute morality, that to me is, in a lot of sense, a pretty big piece of evidence that you kind of do. So even though you claim, and this, I'm not trying to come at you, I'm just kind
That's
of
totally
observing.
cool. I'm totally chill with it.
Cool. So it's, even though you might say like, yeah, I guess I don't really believe in absolute morality, or I'm not really sure what that would mean, and I want to stay within a subjective framework. Even though you might say that, in action, you're forced to accept certain things, and you do implicitly, even if you don't articulate them that way. So then the question is because you say certain things with your mouth, does that trump your actions in the world? And then when push comes to shove, what is greater evidence of what you truly believe? Did you kind of follow what I was going with?
Yeah. If I can characterize this, and let me know if it's not like or how you feel about it. I personally, I can say that everything is subjective, and that we need to live in a subjective world and treat everything subjectively. But in order to act, like if I don't take some sort of objective approach to my actions, then I will be just paralyzed, and I would essentially just I would be like, my first moral question is whether or not it's okay to breathe, and then I would just suffocate and die, right? Because I wouldn't feel good taking an action. So the fact that I'm still living and still making decisions in the world, or decided to come on this podcast with you, that's kind of like an action that demonstrates I really do believe in an objective truth, even if I say that, or my super ego believes that I'm living in a relativistic world. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that's basically the argument. It's complicated, but you got the gist of it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm glad to hear it. I guess what I'd say there is I feel like implicitly in everything I say, I like to believe that there's the phrase before whatever I say, the phrase "as far as I can tell." So,
Yep.
Makes sense, relativist. Really, it's like when I wake up in the morning and if I'm debating whether or not to put on a jacket that day, right? I look out the window and maybe I open it up and I put my hand out there, and relatively to me it feels cold. And I pick up my phone and I look at the temperature and it says 33 degrees outside. Then I say it's cold outside. I should put on a jacket. But really, on that fundamental level, what I'm really saying, internally, how I perceive it is, it seems to be cold outside. I should put on a jacket. Technically speaking, it could be the case that my phone is just glitching out and it's actually 83 degrees, and my hand's only cold because I just got out of the shower and it's wet and a breeze passed by, and it's overcast, so it looks cloudy and rainy, but really, there was just one cloud in front of the sun. These are all things that, although wildly improbable, very much could happen. And so I don't place a lot of stock personally. When I make an action, or when I make that decision, do I put on a coat or do I not put on a coat? It's based on this evidence. And to me, it says, as far as I can tell, all of the evidence seems to point to the fact that I should wear a coat if I want to stay warm. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally get your train of thought there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does that answer the question, or does it just kind of get a part of it?
Well, I don't know what question we're really on at this point. We're kind of zooming around here, in a good way. So, okay, so I get where you're going. That you basically agree that to a certain extent you're forced to act as if there's an objective truth. To a certain extent.
To a certain extent. Again, it's I don't believe in an objective truth. I believe in like my subjective perception, right?
So I guess mm-hmm. I totally get you saying that.
Yeah.
Part of me doesn't care because you're still having to make decisions and still
mm-hmm.
rank ordering things. You're saying mm-hmm. It gets so complicated.
That's okay. It's totally cool.
But like part of me, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's nice that you're saying these things, but you're still making the decision to not kill me. You're still making the decision to not do these mm-hmm. things. So then, what do we do with that? Is that not somehow a hierarchical? This is better than this standard.
So there is a hierarchical. This is better than this standard, but that comes from an internal sense of what I believe is subjectively better or worse. So. For instance, going back to the coat example, do I put on a coat, yes or no? I use all this evidence that I have no way of knowing for sure if it's actually 100% true. So already the evidence I don't believe to be objectively true. But more than that, the goal is also kind of like subjective for me. So like, do I put on a coat with all of this evidence if I want to stay warm? The implication there is that I believe that staying warm is a good thing. That's something I should try to do. I just don't believe that morally I can objectively say that staying warm is a good thing, right? If I had the true belief that like, if I had the belief that I would overheat in 33-degree temperature, if I had the belief that I needed to freeze to death in order to go to like Valhalla or something, then my goal would be like, then that relativist subjective moral goal would be I should not put on a coat because that gives me another opportunity to freeze to death and, drink mead forever in the Hall of the Vikings. So while pretty much everyone would agree again that we would put on a coat because we like to stay warm because we don't like, getting hypothermia and dying. I don't necessarily equate like an objective truth with like everyone agreeing that, for instance. Does that kind of...
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Are you allowed to criticize the other perspective?
Yes and no. I'm so sorry. No.
Well, I will say this real quick.
Yeah.
I admire you staying, relatively logically consistent about your relativism. I admire that. I really do.
Thank you. So, I really appreciate that. These are great questions, by the way. I really appreciate you asking them. So that is a difficult question. Is can I critique other people's systems? And again, it's yes and no. At the very least, I feel like I can critique other people's systems as far as like what I can get from them. So if I talk with someone and someone's like, and I believe like, hey, we should all look both ways before crossing the road. And another person says, no, morally, that's terrible. We need to run headfirst into the road every single time without crossing or without checking both ways. I could see that point of view, and I'd be like, for me, that's stupid. Like that totally misaligns with everything I believe, like personally, like self-preservation and caution and like civil order and like yada yada yada. That just totally doesn't align with like my beliefs. And so I can critique it from that perspective of whether or not I think that would be stupid for me or in my personal experience. That being said, it could be that this person has a reason for believing the silly or outwardly seeming silly or like terribly stupid thing. And maybe like a set of odd life circumstances that led them to believe that thing. Maybe like a religious zeal or a spiritual zeal could lead them there. And if their value is literally like we should Darwin style select people just based on how lucky they are dodging traffic. Like if that's a core belief they have, then I would have to say, wow, what a great system, you know, that we have an ethical inclination to run headfirst into traffic without looking both ways. But I can't objectively say that someone else's is better than worse than mine. I can just say that doesn't align with my values. I think that's stupid for me personally, but I don't necessarily know what's right or wrong for you. But okay. I think that's stupid, and I'm probably going to let you know I think it's stupid.
Okay.
In a kind, polite way.
Yeah, as best you can, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I get where you're going, and I understand the examples you're using. So, and what's interesting here is I actually, to a large extent, went through a similar thought process.
Oh, nice.
For quite a while. Where I ended up with this, so this might be interesting for you, is as I moved towards more extreme examples, I was less and less able to utter the words, well, that's just their value system, I better not criticize it. Or not that I better not criticize it, but that I can never know for sure if they're right or wrong. And again, I'm not trying to put you in a box here. I'm totally cool. Kind of what I think. And so... And I guess the extreme version of that for me was reading about what happened in Auschwitz. Yeah. I had no ability to utter that phrase. There was no doubt anymore that was wrong. And I don't know how we live in a world where we're not allowed to criticize what happened there. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. Something I want to ask is, do you believe we live in a world where we're not allowed to criticize like Auschwitz or what happened there?
No, but I worry that's what I think we are. I worry that if you go too far down, again, because so let's say moral relativism. Well, it depends. Do you mean like you're an absolute moral relativist, like there is no ability to criticize other people at all 100%? Will that be the extreme version? Or are you trying to carve out the possibility that you could be wrong about something in the moral dimension because it's extremely complicated? That seems reasonable. So then where are you kind of in the middle? And I'm not trying to pin you down. I'm just trying to kind of figure out where you're at. So I don't necessarily think that I think we have to live in a world where we're able to criticize Auschwitz. And people that say that we can't are wrong and are leading us towards a world that could recreate Auschwitz. Does that make sense?
No, yeah. Personally, I agree with that.
Okay.
I 100% think we should live in a world. Yeah. Solidarity. I would 100% believe we should live in a world where we can criticize whatever, whoever, whenever. That is okay. I personally totally believe that.
Okay.
If I want to get a bit more specific about my system, sure. I think there's a term for. I don't know if this 100% describes it, but I think the term is like I'm an individualistic moral relativist or something like that. But essentially what I believe is that I can judge like the moral good of a person by how they enact their own beliefs. That does not dictate, however, how I feel about them or whether I think something should be allowed to continue or to stop. So you probably thought of this question like that immediately popped into your head. I might just jump ahead in line and answer it. So like you might ask me like would certain German people in like the 1940s, like World War II, for instance, like would I have to say then that they are like a good person, you know, because of all the atrocities and stuff, if they were if they were manning Auschwitz, if they were running it, and the double-edged sword I have to the big bullet I have to swallow as a relativist is I have to say, according to that person, it seems that they lived their moral values to the best of their ability. I think what they did is horrible. Personally, I value life and liberty.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Real quick. So you would say that they believed at least that they were being moral or at least doing something good.
Maybe. I don't know. Personally, I believe a lot of the big hateful figures like Hitler or like Stalin or Mao or whoever. I don't really personally. If I had to speculate, I don't think they believed these things were right. I think they were just grabbing power and that they were fueled by hate, and then they took on their morals, and then they had this hate, and then they made morals to supply to work with the hate.
Sure.
And so personally, I think that's immoral, and I think that's terrible. Technically, I don't have the knowledge to know that, even if that's what I personally think.
Sure.
So what I have to say is if they truly believed these things and they truly acted in these ways, I have to say that in their own system, they acted morally. But I think what they did was horrifying and terrible. And I think in my personal system that I would have a moral obligation to, like, for instance, like, get engaged in, like, a war, for instance. And so does that kind of make sense? Is like, I can acknowledge that someone else might think they're doing the right thing. And I would have to say, like, okay, morally, that means you're okay. But that doesn't mean that I still have to act on my own values and stop you, because I think that's what's okay. You know what I mean?
I think so. So you're trying to say that, okay, so I'll just go here and maybe this
go all the way.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'll go here. So I read a book during my, I think it was 20. It's called Ordinary Men by, have you heard of it? It was by Christopher Browning.
I don't know if I have.
Okay, so no big deal. How dare you? It followed Police Battalion 101, I believe, and basically the book was about an ordinary group of Germans that were just typical people, carpenters, middle-aged men that they didn't get sent to the front lines because they were kind of a little bit older, so they didn't immediately get drafted.
Yeah.
But they were required to serve in some extent. So they all kind of got drafted. I think some of them volunteered for this police battalion. And this police battalion initially was just in charge of maintaining order in Germany, etc. But over time, slowly but surely, they were tasked with doing more and more reprehensible things.
Yeah.
So these people that arguably were upstanding citizens in the 1930s, they were good fathers, they were good, respectable members of society. At the end of the book were the people that would shoot naked pregnant women in fields and didn't feel a thing, you could argue, based upon their psychology and the accounts that we have. So where I go there is I think that they very well might have gotten to a point where they no longer felt morally wrong about what they were doing. They maybe even felt that they were, enacting the Third Reich or whatever, that they were being a true citizen of the state. And one other quote here is relevant is Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote The Gulag Archipelago, which is a account of the absolute catastrophe of the Soviet Union. And one of his famous quotes was that the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man.
Yeah.
And I basically agree with that, and this idea that we have capacities for both, and that for me to assume that I would have acted any differently than these policemen, if I was born in the same situation, is quite the claim. I wouldn't make that claim. I think I probably would have done exactly what they did and probably felt okay about it. But then the question is not, could I imagine their psychology? Could I imagine not feeling reprehensible about it? But can we say that they did something morally wrong? And if we can't, then I don't know what to do about Auschwitz. And you already kind of agreed, like, we can criticize.
Yeah,
but
100%.
Do you see where I went there?
What
do you think about that?
No, I think it's a great question. First of all, I appreciate you recognizing like all of the systems in place that make people do these bad things, and the fact that inside all of us is this terrible potential, right? Personally, I agree with that. I think that I feel very fortunate to be who I am and to have the beliefs that I have and to not be in those situations. Because I feel like it could be any one of us. Like we could all turn against each other if we're not careful.
All you'd have to do is shut off the electricity for 4 weeks.
Honestly,
then we'd see what would happen.
I think a lot of bad shit would happen. Sorry, can I curse?
Yeah, you can curse.
Okay,
it's allowed.
All right, cool.
Man. Keep going. I kind of cut you off. But
no, you're totally cool. But going back to your question of like, what are the implications of us not being able to say whether something is morally wrong? And the distinction I'd like to draw is, where a moral, like an objectivist, someone who believes that morals can be objective, would say there is this is morally wrong for everybody. I would say that this person thinks it's morally right. Okay, that means they're acting morally. I think it's morally reprehensible, And I think I have a moral action to condemn this and act against it. So, like the problem for me of whether or not it was truly immoral is irrelevant. What matters to me whether or not it's immoral to me, and that's what influences my actions. And the rest almost feels like similar to semantics to me, where I just don't really concern myself with objective morality, and like the only thing I could know is my subjective morals, and I know, or at least I'd like to think I know that like what happened in like Auschwitz, or like what these like policemen that you mentioned did, like is wrong. I personally truly believe that, and I believe I have an ethical responsibility to act against it. And so I don't think that all that much meaningful would change, like for me personally, as far as like how I think about like the Nazis, for instance.
Sure. Yeah, and one thing that I think we're probably encountering here, which is something that I encounter quite often, is the fact that when you get into conversations, you end up recognizing that, and this is the importance of defining your terms to begin with. And it's not like I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we didn't define our terms, but it is important, and because I think we probably, this always happens, we probably agree more than we think we do, but are using the words differently to a certain extent, which is always interesting to me. So I think that you and I probably have a little bit of a disconnect on what even moral is, maybe perhaps, and we could explore that. But that's interesting to me. I get why you're saying that they thought within their moral system, they were being moral.
Maybe like in this hypothetical.
Yep. Yeah. One quick thing here. You're saying at some level, all that really matters to you is your own personal system. The motivation for that is because you're hesitant of, or you're well aware of your lack of ability to understand the minds of others, let's say.
Yeah.
And then make judgment claims about that. But that doesn't alleviate your, let's say, burden to follow your system of ethics and morality. Is that true?
100%. So, if I, if I was like back in like middle school, whatever, if I was in the playground, I was thinking about this in middle school, but hypothetical. If I came across like a bully, right, who every day he takes like the same kids like lunch money, right? If I talked to that bully and he said like, hey, actually it is ethical for me to take this kid's lunch money because did you know might makes right? And like he could trace back for me like all of like the logic and reasoning, and he gave me like a perfectly consistent system for why he should be allowed to take this kid's lunch money. I might like honestly, I would probably respect that, and I'd be like, oh wow, like you're a very moral person, unexpectedly well thought for a middle school bully. But that doesn't change what I have to do. I feel like I might have an obligation at first to try to change that person's mind, but if they force me into a situation where I either like I have no recourse to do that, or it just does not work, I would feel morally compelled to pick a fight with the bully, for instance, or like maybe tell a teacher because I was a total wimp back in middle school. So like I can recognize someone else as believing that they're doing something moral, but that doesn't stop my own action. It's kind of like the great tragedy, I feel, of relativism, is you can have two people like encountering each other with violent intent that will end with one or both dying, and they can both be doing morally the right thing. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I get the distinction. I still disagree, but that's fun. So
totally, I'm glad.
I totally get the distinction. So okay, so not that this isn't fun, it is, but I think we might just keep going in circles here, and I do want to talk about a couple more things. So
sure.
But I thought that was useful. I think we got to at least a couple interesting places.
Yeah,
I'd say.
I'd say so.
Yeah. Okay, so let's let's go to Nietzsche, because I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about Nietzsche, and I thought that would be kind of fun. So, well, first off, what is your history with Nietzsche? Like, what have you read of his?
Honestly, not much. Mostly just excerpts. Parts of what we've done in class. Not even all of that. Most of what I'm familiar with Nietzsche from Nietzsche, I don't know. Is through my work. I'm a tutor.
Okay.
So I help teach people write, and I actually teach people and have taught people at Western for the past Rider University the past like 3.5 years. So I've taught them like argumentation to the student body.
Cool.
And organization. It's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of super cool people. But over there, if you talk to like some rhetoricians, they'll mention to you that like Nietzsche is a really like big influence on the field. And I kind of like passively, I've kind of like gained like some of that influence. And I feel like through my own thought processes and things that I experience in media and how I think about them, I feel like I'll come to conclusions, and then I'll read Nietzsche and he'll come to some similar conclusions. Minus some of like the wild misogyny stuff that we talked about in class the other day. But other than that, I don't really have a super extensive history with him, other than some of his big concepts and his most notable quotes.
Okay. Yeah. So I'd say something similar to me. I'll admit I tried I tried reading Beyond Good and Evil, and I'll fully admit that I failed.
It's totally cool.
It is just, the thing about Nietzsche is his paragraphs could be books. Mm-hmm. That's how deep they can go sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's so, you almost need to read it and then spend twice the time just sitting there and thinking about it to even come close to grasping what he might be getting at. So, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing, because then it's kind of hard to read, but it's also incredibly deep. Yeah. I'd say I'm most familiar with his famous quote when he declared the death of God.
God is dead.
And,
God remains dead. You've killed him.
Yep, the classic. But what I think a lot of people don't realize about that quote was they don't read the next two sentences. And the next two sentences essentially is where he laments the what's coming. He laments this. This is not a triumphant proclamation. He said something like, "And we won't be able to wash away the blood."
Yeah.
Because he recognized that this, in some sense, was an absolute catastrophe. He recognized the collapse of the moral belief structures that had existed for centuries as a result of the scientific rationalist movement that had destroyed fundamentalistic belief structures. And what he was partially concerned with, and what I also am concerned with, because I think we're still living through this, is that we could end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is sometimes you can swing, like if you can imagine a pendulum, you can swing too far in almost a reactionary way. This is the problem with even politics to a certain extent, although it's just a minefield of stupidity. But what can happen is when you react to something, you can end up being pushed to these poles and not actually getting to a nuanced center. And Nietzsche was concerned about this. He was worried that because of the power of the Enlightenment movement, it would destroy Christianity and throw out the moral systems as such, and we'd live in a nihilistic, too relativistic world.
Yeah.
And I basically agree with his concern. Now, whether or not it's fully come true is up to debate. I do think that the 20th century was evidence to a certain extent of the collapse of traditional belief structures. But I think that quote is particularly interesting. What do you think about that quote? Just kind of off the cuff here.
Yeah, totally. That's one of the quotes I'm very familiar with from him. Murderers of all murderers, like, with what water shall we cleanse ourselves? It's some powerful stuff. First I want to recognize that I think that reaction is totally fair. And you mentioned, like, you kind of went through a relativistic phase. I don't want to assume anything about, like, your faith or your systems or anything, but
sure.
I know when I, at least from my personal experience, when I like stopped believing in God, I remember going through a phase where I was just like, what a tragedy this is. If God were real, like all of these great things, you know, like the moral truths and like goodness and badness and kindness and compassion that we have for each other, like are they all just going to crumble to the ground now that I've had this realization? And I think it's a totally valid feeling to have because I feel like in traditional like Western culture, we very much like we judge goodness and badness and everything generally through like pseudo religious senses, or very much through like Christian senses at some level. And so I think it's a totally fine reaction to have, and I agree with Nietzsche there. That being said, I think there, after that reaction, at least for me, when it settled, which it took like a couple of years for me to fully like recover, I personally, I found that for me, like feelings of like justice and morality, they stuck around. Without God or without like traditional Western Christian values, even though like those really helped getting the ball like rolling for all of us, and they were, I might even hazard to say that they were necessary. I don't feel like, at least for me, they're necessary anymore. And I think that societally we are heading in a direction where that might be the case. We just have to treat it with care. Like advocating for systems like, or advocating systems where we make our own meaning, or we live well in spite of having a lack of meaning, but we create our own moral systems so we can like coexist. I think that's something that we can attain, possibly even within our lifetimes. And so, while I'm definitely with Nietzsche on the fact that it was a great tragedy to lose, like, God. It really was like a murder. At the same time, I also think it's time to begin, like, the cycle anew. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and you opened up a couple different boxes, which is totally fine. But, yeah, there's a couple different things we could go into there.
Pick a poison.
Let's just go right to God. You know, let's just go straight to the
totally. The G word. I'm so excited.
Yeah, the G word. We'll leave Jesus to the side for now. Jesus is a whole nother realm. But okay, the G word. So you described for you and Nietzsche. This is within the context of Nietzsche, of course. You described you lost belief in God. Is that true? And obviously that's complicated.
Yeah.
So this is what I like to ask people. What do you mean by God? And I'll add some caveats here, because I'm not convinced that our conception of God is always reflective of how we act. And what I mean by that is we typically have this view of God as a metaphysical being, as this person almost. This person that we can communicate with in a very, at least from a Christian perspective, a very real way. I'm not convinced that that is actually the best way to conceptualize God, and I'm also not convinced that that's the way that most people actually conceptualize God. Because I have a very hard time with metaphysics. I have a really hard time believing in the validity of metaphysical things, because in the name metaphysics, they're beyond our physics. They're beyond even our conception to a certain extent. These are concepts that are outside of time. These are concepts that are outside of our understanding. And what I tend to do with the concept of God is I kind of say, I don't know about the metaphysics, let's say, but I do know about how I have to act in the world. And if you equate the concept with God with a concept of what are you aiming at, what are your goals, what do you believe is better or worse, or to use more language, what do you believe is right or wrong, if you look at it that way, is God as a moral system, as reason, as something that you pursue, then I don't think that the concept of God is so foreign, because I actually think that everyone, to a certain extent, believes that they have to have goals, and that they have to have something that they're aiming at, and they have to make moral judgments. And maybe the thing that they're aiming at is akin to the idea of God, that you have to act as if God exists in order to live in the world, in order to live within a moral framework. And I know I just brought up a bunch of stuff, but this kind of connects to my conception of pragmatism. And it's almost a pragmatic view of God of like, well, what's useful here? Maybe Nietzsche's correct about a fundamentalistic metaphysical perspective that it's not tangible / we just don't know. And I basically agree with that. But does that mean that we have to throw out the conception of God as such? What do you think about that kind of distinction I made?
Just to recap, because I don't know if I completely followed, but I want to make sure.
It's a lot, yeah.
That's totally cool. So you'd say, like, God as an idea isn't just the Christian God necessarily, but is almost an ideal of, like, objectivity or moral truth that we should aspire to. That you could almost have in, like, a secular sense. Is that...
Yes.
Okay.
More or less exactly, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Nailed it. Awesome. Oh, gosh. So, I guess that's really interesting. That's a really unique perspective. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess, like, going back to pragmatism, I definitely think that sounds like a very pragmatic reason for believing in God.
You got me.
I just don't personally believe that we need to have that.
Okay.
I think that personally, I feel like believing in the concept of a God or of an objective truth comes with certain drawbacks, and I think those drawbacks aren't worth adopting, like, God in the pragmatic or true religious sense.
Sure.
And so I think there are other things we can appeal to that will let us have, like, societal cohesion and cooperation between people. Things like innate senses of human compassion, or humans' innate desire to be curious and to find new things and discover new cultures and experience new arts. I think these things are almost immutable characteristics that humans have that we can appeal to in a total godless sense. Regardless of whether or not there is an objective good, here, listen to this piece of music that my country made, and see how beautiful it is. And here's a perspective to go with it that enhances it even more. You can have more of this. We just need to work together. And I can even experience some of yours, and we can communicate in a way where we get different perspectives on the world from each other that enhance and enrich our own understandings. And so, like, that's kind of the future I shoot for. And I feel like carrying on with the perception of a God or an objective truth stops us from experiencing all these different perspectives that we would have access to through, like, a relativistic approach. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And again, I sympathize with the fear of a too rigid system of belief. Because if you, and this is a classic, we'll go here because this is kind of fun. It's kind of the fundamental difference between liberal and conservatives.
Yeah.
Conservatives like walls, they like borders, they like things to be fixed almost to a certain extent. Liberals generally don't like walls. They like change. They like things to be more fluid. And the thing is both of them are right, fundamentally. Both of them have a good point depending on the situation. Sometimes you need more creativity. You need more walls to be broken down, etc. Sometimes you need someone to say, actually, okay, the system's working pretty good, and we should stick with this for a while before we have a really good reason not to.
Yeah.
So within that desire to not alienate possibility, I think is one thing that probably drives you. You don't want to – you're probably somewhat concerned, from what I can tell, about if we adopt too rigid of a belief structure, we're going to miss out on some really good things simply because we have such a rigid belief structure. Do you think that's probably true?
Yeah, I would say so. And yep.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure we're on the same page there. So I get where you're going with that. One thing that I wanted to say was you talked about beauty and the experience of beauty. One aspect of at least the way that I conceptualize God is is akin to this idea of beauty, is akin to this idea of experiencing something that you can't fully articulate. You don't fully understand why it's impacting you in such a way, but nonetheless, it's a meaningful experience. You're like, wow, that's so incredible. And to me, to a certain extent, that's seeing a little bit of God there. That's seeing a little bit of, I know the dreaded G word, a little bit of that beauty is akin to the idea of God. And I understand that the way that I describe God in my in the definition that I've tried to cobble together here might be different than what a lot of people might think, but I think that this is going to be a bold statement, but I think that a lot more people believe in the truth of that definition than realize it, and may not be able to articulate it, but I think that's really what is more solid.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think I get what you're talking about, and it's been that made it more clear for me what you meant by, like, we're talking about extremely similar things, maybe just like through completely different like words and frameworks.
Yeah.
You know? There's a do you know Joseph Campbell? Are you familiar with this guy?
I am.
Another big guy in English and rhetoric, or at least English. I've read half of his book, Hero with a Thousand Faces. It's just so tense. But there's a quote that he references, and it's that the truth has one face, but the sages speak of it with many names. There's something along those lines, and it sounds like that's something you might more agree with, where there is one truth or an objective truth. But we stand from perspectives where, like, we have to listen to sages speak of it in different names. But we could all be held to like the same, like but there's that objective truth at the center of it all. Is that something you'd agree with, or does that kind of?
More or less, I would go a little bit different. I would say that we're forced to act as if there is.
Okay.
I get nervous with even claims of objective truth because I'm back to something that I think you and I fully agree on, which is our limited knowledge. Yeah. So I get nervous with those claims too. Because I'm more pragmatic in how I think, and the fact that I think truth is more linked to what you do and not what you say, I tend to go in the direction of we're forced to act in such a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I essentially agree. I feel like you and I, if presented in similar situations, our actions would be almost the same, but that there's like a 1% margin of error. So like you say, like, we have to act as though truth is objective. I essentially say we don't have to act as if truth is objective. We just have to keep in mind that we must act with the best knowledge that we have available to us, right? Like in practice, these two things are probably almost exactly the same. But ideologically, they certainly have that difference of, just in the back of my mind, I keep it, like, I always keep it that whatever I'm doing or saying could be wrong, or I could have my mind changed on pretty much anything. As I'm sure you seem really open-minded as well. And so, the only meaningful difference I get from this is that, or at least from this particular disagreement,
sure,
is that you'd say we have to, like, the chances of this being objectively correct are not 100%, but because we have to make an action, we must pretend that they are. I would say the chances of this being correct are not 100%, and we don't have to pretend as if they are. We just have to know they're not 100% and act anyway. It's kind of like everything we do, I believe, is a gamble. Like every single thing that we do. We might not know the percentages, but every time, like, you take a turn in a car, there's a gamble there that you're taking. And so I would never say, like, there was a 100% chance that I should or shouldn't do something. I just need to act, and like keeping the fact that it is 100%, I feel like it helps me keep my mind open to change. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, no, there's a good little summary there. I like that. Cool. All right. Well, now since we've just, fully figured out all things to do with God, and, now we're just,
finally, wrap it up, boys. Nietzsche, close the book on him. We don't need him anymore. Get him out of here.
Now, let's, I wanted to do one more thing. I am running out of brain, but I do want to talk about another thing, which is free will versus determinism.
Yeah.
And I think we talked a little bit. I think this was actually the initial impetus for this conversation to a certain extent. We were talking about this in class, and I'll just briefly summarize kind of what I was trying to say, which is that I tend to think that whenever you go too far down the free will train, or whenever you go too far down the deterministic train, you run into big problems. So I think we're actually, to a certain extent, forced to live in a bit of a middle ground between the two, and certain situations require more acknowledgement, let's say, of circumstances outside of your control. In certain situations require a greater acknowledgement of your capacity to make decisions. And I'm curious, I want to know what you think about, well, that, and then just in general, the topic in general.
It's kind of a lot. Let me answer at least part of it, and then we'll go back.
No problem.
As far as free will goes, I definitely empathize with the perspective of like acting as though we are not completely free will, but also not completely deterministic. In general, I really try to avoid binaries of just yes or no, and so I really appreciate that thinking. That being said, this is one of like the rare few cases where I would say we might be like, I'm almost 100% deterministic.
Okay.
Within the reasonable realm of knowledge that I can know things. And as far as like the moral implications of that go, at first, just to speak my own personal experience, feeling like we live in a determined system at first is horrifying, existentially terrifying, and inordinately depressing. At least for me personally.
Okay. Yeah, we can agree on that.
Right?
Yep.
That being said, I held on to that belief, and I kind of have a different perspective on it now. We talked about this in class earlier, but one thing I think it allows us is I think it does away with the idea that people can be evil or people can be bad people. I don't have that belief anymore. I really just have the belief that people are people. And like we were saying with like the policeman book that you were talking about, I think I could be in anyone else's situation, and I would have like I would essentially act the same. And I actually ended up, I feel like that granted me more empathy for people, because I have this feeling that like obviously we might have to agree on some level of fault, but on an existential level, nothing is anybody's fault. We're all just kind of doing the best we can with who we are. That's my general feeling. And so we talked about the justice system in class, and I mentioned that I feel like the justice system is kind of a misnomer. I view like the justice system as an extension of pragmatism, because we can't have a society where people can go out and do anything, because we're not at a place yet where we can trust everybody, given the situations that they're in, to not commit crimes. I feel like there's a large amount of people that would commit crime that would harm all of us in society and basically make it fall apart if we didn't have a justice system. And so I just see it as a pragmatic extent. Does that answer part of the question at least?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get you're making you're making a pretty good case for a more deterministic view of the world. And this is the thing about it too, is like none of really what you just said I disagree with on a serious level. Mm-hmm. I guess so I'm all for more compassion, and like you said too, the book that I referenced was a big one for me in terms of recognizing that what this is kind of a broader point, but what people tend to do is they tend to read history as the savior. I would have been Anne Frank. Mm-hmm. I would have been the saint. And the reality is you wouldn't have been. Mm-hmm. By all statistical probability, you would have done exactly what the people in Police Battalion 101 did. It's just the reality. And what that does, and as you point out accurately, I think, is that it gives you a certain level of empathy and compassion for people that if you didn't recognize that, you just wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think that there's a lot there that's good. And you also pointed out the fact that, and I think this is very true, is that a deterministic framework is it ushers in a certain level of depression and despair.
Yeah.
But I think that that's something that is worth focusing on here, because I can't, and this may be because I'm more like, okay, what's useful and what's not.
Yeah.
Something can be, let me put it this way, if one day, as Sam Harris, he's a famous atheist and rational dude, if one day we end up being able to fully computerize, like with computers, predict exactly, like we're able to model you perfectly, to the extent that we're able to predict with 100% accuracy what you're going to say and do in the next statement. Mm-hmm. In some ways, that would validate a deterministic model of the universe.
Yeah.
In some ways. But even if we were able to do that, I would still say that believing that we are deterministic 100% is just an absolutely idiotic idea. Mm-hmm. Because the reality is you just can't live that way. You can't live as if you're 100% deterministic. So regardless of, let's say, the ultimate objective truth reality here, you're forced to act as if you have free will. Mm-hmm. And this gets back into the discussion of truth. Well, does that mean that you have free will, on some objective level? Well, I don't really fully know, but I do know that you have to act as if it's true in order to live. What do you think about that distinction there?
No, that's a great point. Something you said that I may or may not agree with. I'm still working it out.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is kind of like, regardless of whether or not like determinism is 100% true. Like if we were to assume determinism is 100% true, it can be beneficial to act as if you have free will. At least from like a mental perspective, it feels so much better, like to feel like you have control over your own emotions and feelings. It's like the first step of like any sort of like therapy. It feels like, or like anything where you want to get better or improve on yourself. Were you gonna say something?
Well, I think I know where you're going. Not that you have full control, but you have an ability to make change.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep, good catch.
But keep going.
Yeah. That being said, I'm not sure. It's difficult. It's like, from an emotional perspective, I think I do act as though like I make choices. And it gets kind of complicated because like, what is a choice? What is the nature of a choice? Is a choice something that you make with some essence of free will, or is a choice something you do when you consciously acknowledge that you have multiple options? And I fall more on the latter side, where I think a choice is just something you do when you're conscious of multiple options and you decide to act on like one or more of them, or technically none. And I feel like that gives me like my own sense of like my own sense of peace and my own sense of like happiness and like rough control, quote unquote, over my actions. And I think it also, like, acknowledging that I do have choices, even if they're already predetermined, acknowledge that I have choices and I can learn from my choices. That allows me to keep that sense of personal responsibility that you might agree is I feel is really important.
Yes, it's very important.
Mm-hmm. Where if you lose that sense of moral responsibility, like it's just totally terrible. I have this personal, I have PTSD, and like something really big in like therapy for PTSD is the fact that like even if you come from these really like tough or dire circumstances, like asserting or recognizing within yourself that you still make choices despite like these circumstances that lead you to do certain bad things, that is power, and that is healthy. And so I think that's kind of the line we have to ride there. Is maybe on the grand deterministic free will perspective, maybe we don't have choices. Personally, I don't think we do. But I can kind of agree with you in that we have to act as though we at least have choices. I don't know if I agree with we have to act as if we have free will to any extent, but I do agree that we have to act as though we have choices. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I get the distinction you're making there. I guess, so you're making a distinction between act as if we have choices and act as if we have free will. And I get why you're saying that. I would add the caveat, like, I'm not saying free will is akin to, oh, we are then, we're a perfect actor that has no other influences upon us that makes, I wouldn't go that far. No, I'm using the term more in a general sense. So I'm kind of equating it to this idea that we have choices, that this, like, free will necessitates the idea that you're making choices, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Well. Let me clarify. That wasn't super clear. So back to my analogy. You could imagine that there's a system where someone is 100% on the free will train. That they're saying, no, you can. There's no part of you that's deterministic. You have complete freedom. Your past circumstances don't define you at all, etc. I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's an ignorant perspective.
Yeah, I agree.
But then back to the other side, I think that if you think you're 100% deterministic, that also is a non-starter. You can't really go anywhere with that in terms of how you live and stuff like that. So again, I'm trying to think of a better word than for that middle ground. You don't have perfect free will, but you have some level of will, maybe?
I think
will?
There might be a term, I don't know if this is it, but if you're familiar with the term compatibilist, I think that's what this is. Where,
yeah. Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Where it's like we don't have free will, but we have to kind of pretend if we do. Yeah, I'm with you. I really, man, my thoughts are still kind of ambiguous on this, but
sure.
I'm very, like, what you and I believe it sounds like is very close. Again, I pretty much believe, like 99% to a certainty, that like we are like determined. But as a matter, like you were saying, of our own self-improvement, I think it is important to view our choices as choices and decisions that we can learn and improve from. And that's kind of it. Like if I want to, like in my own deterministic system, to improve and like in order to not feel like this nihilistic dread of everything's out of my control and feel just helpless and hopeless. I have to remember that when I make choices, I can learn from those choices. And whether or not me learning from those choices is a product of a deterministic system, emotionally, that doesn't pull me down anymore. Because I just keep in mind that I can learn from these things, regardless of whether or not it's been predetermined. And so I don't call that like a free will. And I don't really call that, personally, I don't call that like a pragmatic belief in free will necessarily. I just kind of acknowledge that we probably don't have free will and acknowledge that I can live well in spite of this. And I can make quote unquote choices without free will. It kind of sounds like we're pretty close in agreement of what we're talking about. But does that sound about right? Or
yeah, I'd say you're basically hitting it on the ball, if that's the correct expression.
Totally.
But
something like that.
Hitting it on the head.
The nail on the head. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. But yeah, no, I would say so. And again, we kind of get into definitions too when it gets tricky. But no, I'd say overall that makes a lot of sense. So I'm glad that you think that you have the ability to improve from your choices. That's important. So
yeah, totally.
Glad we're on the same page there. Oh man, so we've covered a lot of ground. Let's see. I'll admit I am kind of running out of brain.
That's totally cool. It's been a long night. I'm a whiskey and half a joint in, so I mean.
Hey, there you go.
It's legal in Michigan for all those outsiders. For listeners.
Yep. The masses, the masses that are listening. No, but hey, man, thanks for coming on. It was a lot of fun. I think we covered a lot of stuff, and I learned a lot about your perspective, and I hope the same. So seriously, thanks, man.
Yeah, totally. Thanks so much for having me on, Nate. This was a lot of fun. If you ever want to do it again, let me know. Yeah. I'm part of a just something I want to mention real quick to you.
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
know if I did before. A friend and I actually we're starting up a program on campus called Bridge USA, and what we do is we promote solution-oriented political discussion by having people of all political backgrounds coming and just talk about whatever, and we talk in a way where we listen to the other person and then try to figure out solution-oriented policies, and to kind of turn the heat down a little bit in politics and get people listening and seeing each other as humans. So if you're interested in something like that, definitely let me know, like outside of class, or you have my number if you want to message me. If we have any friends that are interested, but it's very similar to what you're trying to do here. It sounds like, and it'd be really cool to have you if you ever wanted to join.
Yeah, man, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I bet people would be interested in that as well. I got some friends that I'm sure would be down that road. So cool, man.
Totally.
Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about it more. Cool. Final thoughts?
Not too much. I had a really good time today. Morally, I see you as morally consistent, buddy. I think you're doing great. So in my moral system, I think you're great.
I'm glad.
Awesome. That's about it for me. Any for you?
No, just appreciate it. Love the conversation. I find it very interesting and appreciate your time. So, anyway.
Thank you.